A lengthy and intense exchange between Fox News reporter Peter Doocy and White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has gone viral after Doocy stupidly suggested that President Biden, Vice President Harris, and Jean-Pierre herself are somehow responsible for the assassination attempts against Donald Trump because they correctly call him a threat to democracy. And a fed-up Karine Jean-Pierre had to shut Peter Doocy down. We have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have one long clip to look at here. Peter Doocy is someone we've talked about before on this channel. He is Fox News' correspondent to the White House press corps. He has had viral interactions with President Biden, former White House press secretary Jen Psaki, and Karine Jean-Pierre herself. He has been a frenemy, a foil. He's annoyed the White House, and understandably so. And then at times, he's had some comedic moments with them as well. But there's really nothing funny about this because, unfortunately, Doocy is peddling the Fox propaganda line that somehow this administration is responsible for the assassination attempts against Donald Trump. And Karine Jean-Pierre goes into vivid detail about how stupid that idea is. Here we go.
Kill Donald Trump again. And you're here at the podium in the White House briefing room calling him a threat. How many more assassination attempts on Donald Trump until the president and the vice president and you pick a different word to describe Trump other than threat?
Peter, if anything from this administration, I actually completely disagree with the premise of your question. The question that you're asking, it is also incredibly dangerous in the way that you're asking it, because American people are watching. And to say that from an administration who has consistently condemned political violence, from an administration where the president called the former president and was thankful, grateful that he was okay, from an administration who has called out January 6th, called out the attack of Paul Pelosi, called out and said we need to lower the temperature after the Butler incident. And now for you to make that kind of comment in your question, because your question involved a comment and a statement. And, it is... that is also incredibly dangerous when we have been very clear in condemning political violence from here. What I have said about the president, the former president, about January 6th is facts that you all have reported. It is fact. When you have a former president who basically says that the election wasn't, the results of the election were not the results of the election. When dozens of more than 60 Republican judges said that it was a free and fair election. More than 60 said it was indeed a free and fair election. You had more than 2,000 people who were told to go to the Capitol. It was one of the darkest days of our democracy. One of the darkest days. There were law enforcement officers who died because of what happened at the Capitol. And they were there because the former president told them to go there. I mean, I don't know if that's not a threat in our democracy when it was one of the darkest days of our democracy. January 6th, one of the darkest days.
And we're going to play more of that clip in just a second. But again, you can see how fed up she is, how frustrated she is. And this is somebody who has a pretty good rapport with Peter Doocy, who tolerates his nonsense quite often. But then again, there are times that he's really genuinely off base and his questions are not playful. They're not playfully antagonistic. They are incredibly irresponsible. See, the difference is it's perfectly reasonable to make the case that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. The argument in favor of that conclusion is quite robust, and Peter Doocy is certainly not in a position to refute it. It would be irresponsible, in my opinion, it would be irresponsible for President Biden, Vice President Harris, Karine Jean-Pierre, and others to not refer to Donald Trump as a threat to democracy when, in fact, he is. That's part of the job of being the president of the United States, is correctly identifying political threats. He's not referring to Donald Trump as a threat to democracy simply because Donald Trump wants to cut taxes on corporations and raise taxes on the poor. He's not referring to Trump as a threat to democracy because of genuine conservative policies that Trump may endorse or because of genuine policy disagreements. That would be off base. Oh, you want to raise the minimum corporate tax reduce it rather to 5%. That's a threat to democracy. I would agree that would be wildly irresponsible and should be condemned. That's not what Trump's doing, or what President Biden is doing, rather. They're referring to Trump as a threat to democracy because Trump tried to steal a free and fair election. Trump engaged in a false elector plot and tried to pressure the sitting vice president to just basically throw out the results of an election and unlawfully appoint him as the president of the United States again. And then he directed his followers, after lying to them and jazzing them up and hyping them up and agitating them, he directed them to march on the Capitol. And then he sat on his orange ass for 3 hours and watched the insurrection unfold and didn't do anything, even though, as both the leader of the cult, he had the moral power to snap his fingers effectively and disperse them, right? Which is what happened after he went on Twitter, posted that video and said, go home. And then in his role as commander-in-chief, head of state, head of government, as chief executive, he had the highest constitutional and civic obligation to crush that insurrection if he couldn't prevent it in the first place. And he failed for 3 hours. He failed in ways that no other president has before or since. And yes, he is a unique threat to democracy in large part because he's unapologetic about all of it and still won't concede the election. Donald Trump is factually a threat to democracy, and it's not unreasonable at all, even in the aftermath of a tragic assassination attempt against Donald Trump, to refer to him that way. As Ben Shapiro would say, facts don't care about your feelings. Another clip.
And so we have been very clear from here. Now, we can have a disagreement on policies. We can, on issues. That is what we should do. It is important to have those disagreements. It is welcome to have those disagreements on the economy, on healthcare, on foreign policy. But when you start bringing political rhetoric, that is not okay. And that's what you've heard from us, too. You've heard of differences on policies.
But to your point, there are people watching at home who might miss the part where you say, let's lower the temperature, and there are mentally unstable people who are attempting to kill political candidates, attempting to kill Donald Trump, and they are still hearing this White House refer to him as a threat. Is there no concern that people are taking that literally?
We're using examples. We're not just saying that just to say it. January 6th, Peter. January 6th. Wait, January 6th. How many times do we have to? January 6th, 2021. That is a fact, what was reported that happened on that day by some of your colleagues. I mean, and we have, at the same time, denounced political violence over and over, political rhetoric over and over again. Over and over again. But I know your focus has to be on this side of the house. It can't be on your side of the house. I get that. But we also have to be careful on how you're asking me these questions. People are watching, and is what you are saying about us raising political violent rhetoric, however you just formulated it, this is an administration that has denounced and condemned any type of political rhetoric or violence. It is the reason why this president decided to run in 2020. That is why the president decided to come back. He believed that it is important to save the soul of America, of our nation. And he believed it was important that we continue to fight for our democracy, fight for our freedom. That's what you see from this administration. I'm moving on. Go ahead, Ed.
She's right to be upset. She's right to be outraged. President Biden has consistently, publicly, in person, in videos, in text, in interviews, it doesn't matter. He has consistently denounced political violence. You haven't had to twist his arm. You've had to twist Donald Trump's arm to get him to even half-heartedly denounce certain violent groups. He just recently, again, we played the clips. Do you denounce the bomb threats in Springfield, Ohio? Oh, I know nothing about those. Instead of saying, if there are any bomb threats in Springfield, Ohio, my God, of course I condemn them. He doesn't do that. Do you denounce the Proud Boys? What do you want me to say? Instead of just saying, yeah, of course I denounce the Proud Boys. Again, the asymmetry is staggering. President Biden, the Biden-Harris administration, has been infinitely more responsible in its rhetoric and its consistency in terms of condemnation of violence than the Trump campaign or the Trump administrations ever were. And that's just a fact. And what Peter Doocy is doing here is wildly irresponsible. So again, I say to people watching, and I encourage you to do this as well, anyone who tries to bully you into not describing Trump the way that Donald Trump is, just tell them, like, hey, listen, if you want me to stop calling Trump a threat to democracy, tell Donald Trump to stop being a threat to democracy. Tell him to apologize publicly for everything he did involving the 2020 election. He needs to admit that he was wrong, that he screwed up. It was all his fault, not the Democrats at all. It was 100% him. That Joe Biden did beat him fair and square, and denounce political violence from here in the future, and call on his supporters to tone down the rhetoric. And then, of course, Trump himself should stop using aggressive, hostile rhetoric. And then and only then do I think that Democrats would be in any way obligated to not refer to Trump as a threat to democracy. But that's not going to happen. And of course, even if it did happen, the question is, should we believe Trump at all? This is a mess of Donald Trump's own making in terms of how people describe him, and that's his own fault. So good on Karine Jean-Pierre for pushing back. Bad on Peter Doocy for asking such a bad faith, dishonest question when he and everybody else knows that Donald Trump is ultimately the single greatest source of responsibility for what's going on in this country with respect to heated rhetoric. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.